prison, where we create lifelong felons.
It is almost more humane to kill someone immediately than it is to intentionally bury a man alive.
Do you want more criminals? Because this is how you get more criminals.
It's just all sorts of fucked up.
There, but for the grace of God, go I.
We were aiming for the Latinos, and we got all the black people.
Okay, I need an explanation on that.
I see the prison crisis to be directly related to the war on drugs.
Okay, see?
If I didn't offend anybody, you finished them off.
Welcome back to the Epoch Podcast, your weekly dose of mental foreplay. My name's Matt.
I'm Jen.
I'm Austin.
I'm Joni.
I'm Christina.
And I'm David.
And this week we are talking about the prison system. I don't know if we actually just said if we were just talking about here in the U.S. or globally, but there's some interesting stats I think that would help put things in context. The U.S. is approximately 5% of the world population, yet we have about 25% of the world's prison population. That population has increased 700% since the 80s, and that's around the time when mandatory sentencing kind of kicked in. So what were the big things that you guys saw? Like, I mean, I guess the question I was thinking about first is like, why do we imprison people? What's the base reasoning for that? It's not without reason. It's not just a reaction out of fear, but what is the reason that we imprison people?
Before, like, that stat, 5% of the world's population, but literally a quarter of the world's prison population. So a 20th of the total population, but a quarter of the prison population. That's crazy out of whack.
Well, that's because we're the land of the free and the home of the brave, right?
Oh,
Yeah,
duh.
But thinking about
The
it,
freest country in the world.
how many nations just kill people for things?
I
Or
mean,
chop off
well, there's
hands
a
for
few.
things? I mean,
there are a few.
Yeah, but I wouldn't think that would be. I wouldn't think that would be the thing. I think it's mostly that other nations just have.
less crime?
Oh dear, crappy police forces.
That could be a thing as well.
I mean, I know my experience with Costa Rican police is that it's a crappy police force. Same as Mexican.
Lots of corruption.
Lots of corruption.
Lots of, not just, I'm not saying Costa Rica, but just lots of police forces are famous for corruption. We don't have that here in the States.
The more civilized, quote unquote, I mean, I guess, or advanced country like that I have some experience with, Israel, I didn't really see that many cops either. I mean, they were a little more, they're a bit more chill. I mean, you do see them in places like, Jerusalem and stuff like that, where you have the potential of having suicide or bombs, terrorist bombs, attacks and stuff like that. But I don't think that there was a whole lot of more petty crime stuff, I guess, or whatever you call it.
Are you saying laws are more lax?
Possibly, yeah.
There's a lot of factors for sure.
Oh, sure. I mean,
the history behind the prison system and how we got to where we are. And there isn't a whole lot there. Like, imprisonment has kind of always been a thing. But the one thing I thought of that we don't do now is we don't banish people. That used to be a thing, is that you banish people outside your country, but now there's really nowhere to go. So instead, we just lock them up. Because what else are you going to do? If you don't want them in society, that's really the only option.
Send them to Australia.
Or it used to be send them to Australia, and now that's not an option. So,
and I think I'm totally getting Joni through Austin's mic right now.
Yeah, I think so.
Because
that
she's
better?
muted.
There you go.
Yeah.
Well,
Did you hear anything I said?
I could hear it.
Yeah,
It just
totally
sounded-
agreed it,
okay.
but and then we can work with that in the post, but definitely good to fix that. I think one of the interesting things that I find is that whenever I'm watching some kind of outrageous policing action here in the United States, something that's causing outrage, a lot of the times I'm thinking like, do we just fund the system too much that these are the things that we're choosing to police, that we're choosing to spend our effort and energy and money on? Obviously there's other places in the system that money could go, but I don't know, like when I see somebody being harassed for picking up garbage around their house
That's their job.
by 8 police officers, I'm like, what are we doing here?
I remember hearing about that, the churches that were handing out food to like homeless people in the corner
Sure.
and ended up getting arrested for it.
Or children who don't have a permit to sell lemonade on the sidewalk.
Come on.
I mean,
That's legit shit. It's so stupid.
yeah. And I think it goes back to Matt's original question, like why do we imprison people? And I think it's money.
Well, I mean, yeah. Have you seen also the paramilitary vehicles that they've bought that some
Oh boy.
some of these places have, like
The militarization of the police force. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
getting insane.
like these are like humongous, crazy vehicles, and I mean, for what? For what? Really? I mean,
Depends where you're at.
I was going to say we live in a
That
pretty
gets into a whole nother topic.
area,
Yeah.
and I don't see police officers hardly ever. Like, and I'm driving all over the place for work, and I don't see a police officer hardly ever.
Yeah.
Except
It's so
even
weird
when
depending on where you live.
right, I drive by
Right.
the police station, and there might be a cop or two like in the parking lot. And that's about it.
Yeah.
I don't see them patrolling.
I think when we were down on the border in Arizona for a while, like
For sure.
we went down to visit, and they had like an
Tanks.
MRAP parked at an MRAP parked at an elementary school, which is like a military grade vehicle, and we were pumping those out during the height of our time in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I think it's so interesting that we have those for police. One, because it just totally changes the image of who the police are and what their mission is, which in a border town is admittedly sometimes different. But man, the amount of maintenance required for those vehicles, the amount of specialty maintenance, that is expensive.
Hmm.
So
I mean, whoever said it comes back to money. I think it was you, Jen.
It was me.
Like, clearly it's never about the money. It's always about the morals and the principles.
obviously. My bad.
Money
Sorry.
is just it's just a side. So don't follow the money, whatever you do.
Noted.
What is it? $75 billion.
oh
I
yeah.
saw the number today. $75 billion industry
Hmm.
is the prison industry.
That's ridiculous.
Actually, I saw one that said 185 billion. Let me.
Yeah,
check.
like anything, it depends on how you count it. But
in dollars or half dollars.
no, I mean, do you include the police force in the prison industry?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Do you include
Sure.
what do you,
Because this
do you
was-
include the judges?
This also included the judicial system and
Right.
That would explain it.
yeah.
So, but it's huge, and I coming back to that whole like international comparison. Yeah, there are countries where they don't have big prisons because they just kill you. Or you have the guerrilla force. So I get it. It's not that the U.S. is the worst place. Yes, the stat is pretty crazy,
Mhm.
but it isn't exactly one of those stats that you can just take on the nose and say, "See, we're the worst again." Like, so, yeah, that's a fair shake. At the same time, there's cultures that, like, we did an episode already on the Chinese social credit system.
Mhm.
They're introducing social credit as an attempt to let the community police itself. That's one of the interesting side notes that we found in our research was this idea that because China has essentially lost any sense of a higher power in the form of a deity, as a communist country, they're largely atheist, or they're an atheist culture at least. The Chinese government has realized that moral behavior has declined significantly. And so the idea of being nice to your neighbor and not cutting in line and not stealing shit and not beating each other up on the street, like they're having a hard time controlling the world's largest population. And so they introduced social credit as one of the ways to police each other. So when you see somebody jaywalking, you can report them. When you see somebody stealing something, you can report them. And so again, they don't have a prison system like ours. They have a social credit system that if you do something stupid, you don't get to travel. So really, it's a broader subject of how does a country choose to punish bad behavior? And some countries choose to kill you. Some countries choose to remove your ability to travel. Some countries put you in prison, and so on and so forth. And obviously, we're talking about the U.S. prison system. And then so to acknowledge the other options, I think is good for an honest take on the subject. But then to be able to say, okay, we're specifically talking about the prison concept. We understand it's not the only one, but it is certainly one that I think we would all agree we're doing very poorly. So I think for anybody who's listening to this and, well, what about this? What about that? Yeah, we get it. We're acknowledging that. But this is something very specific to the United States. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, but I think you're saying, like, how are we doing? But what's the goal of the prison system? Like, if it's to rehabilitate people, for sure. But
It's failing.
Exactly. If the goal is just to punish people, I mean, I guess we're punishing them pretty well. I don't know.
They're literally screwing up their lives.
Exactly.
One of the stats I heard was that 60% of people that get out of prison return to prison.
I think it's like 67 or 68%.
Yeah, that they can go in, but then by being there is actually making them worse off than they were before, because they're literally having to fight for their life, literally having to fight for food, literally having to fight for everything.
They're learning to become better criminals.
Yes, exactly. That's one of the things I was listening to. So then they go out and just end up back.
And it's almost out of necessity that they're learning to be better criminals.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's life or death.
And that speaks to, I know, my hook where I was talking about, if you want, where you create lifelong felons is in prison, because the behavior that they have to have, whether it's if they're in general population, being warehoused with other, literally stacked in bunks and giant rooms with other inmates, or they're in solitary confinement, which is pretty horrible. You're creating a new person that's going to have attributes that are not the same as when they came in, and those attributes aren't going to be any better for the most part. And it's pretty weird to hear that coming from a place called the Department of Corrections.
Well, and not even just what they learn while they're in there. Like, once they get out, they don't really have a leg to stand on, because they're not able to get student loans, public housing, food stamps. They're
jobs.
They're very hard to get jobs. They're socially disconnected. There's high rates of homelessness and suicide. Like, I wonder why. I mean, gracious. It feels like we're basically dehumanizing people. Once they get sentenced with something, it's like we're saying, well, sorry you made the bad choices. Sucks to be you. You're forever stuck. You're not even anymore.
When I first started researching this, I was watching like a prison documentary and was just horrified at what was going on. I was literally in shock. I had no idea what was going on. I was like, how are we letting this happen? How are we not delving into prison reform? Like, really? And I read and looked at that there are a lot of people that have tried to initiate education and job training, and then it came down to funding, and funding was pulled because they're prisoners. They don't deserve that stuff. So then we're literally creating our own problem, sending them back into society unprepared, uneducated, and causing the same problem. But I did find out this was not widely publicized, that President Trump just passed a bill in December 2018, the First Step Act. Has anyone else heard about that? I hadn't even heard about that.
Mm-hmm. I think wasn't it Kim Kardashian that was trying to work with him on that?
Oh, I'm not sure. But
I know, and that's when Homeboy, the rapper with who always wears the MAGA hat, Kanye West. He was also involved in that.
That's right. I did hear about
married,
that.
right?
But I found a press release.
Just make sure.
See why both of them were talking about it.
Working together.
I found a press release that was just from 2 months ago. So this is really, really new. But one of the things that he's pushing for is vocational training. That President Trump has been pushing for in this act is vocational training and educational training and rehabilitating people so that when they do go back out, they're legitimate citizens and can add back to society instead of just returning back to the prison system.
Well, it makes a lot of sense because the amount of money that it costs, if nothing else, I mean, it's ridiculous. For one example, I was watching one video where it said that the guy, one of her clients, I'm not sure exactly what she did, but she was in the system somehow. The guy was arrested for stealing a $3 bottle of orange juice. He served 50 days in jail, and then he racked up a $10,000 bill somehow. I don't know what all was involved in that, but supposedly justice was served in that case because he paid for his bottle of juice. I mean,
so we paid $10,000
exactly.
for that bottle of juice.
How ridiculous is that? Or for another example, a guy who owed $1,500 in child support, he couldn't pay. He didn't see any way he was going to be able to pay in a timely manner, so he offered to go to jail for 30 days for that.
Did it cancel out the bill?
No, the child didn't get the support. It cost the taxpayers $1,650.
That shouldn't even be an option.
Right? But I mean, he was getting punished, and that to me points to the focus of the system is to punish people.
Sure.
Period. And that doesn't make sense. Like, that's a really old school way of thinking, for sure.
And that comes back to, I was like, can we drill down into like the thing that puts all these people in there, which is the culture of, how do I put it? I don't like what you're doing, so government help, please make him stop. This bullshit of, I disagree with what you're doing, so my politician better make a law to punish you. And it is a culture that we've had with just this massive uptick in micromanagement, social constructing, construction. Constructing. I don't know what's the word.
Sure.
Basically, trying to manipulate our social structure through law. Yeah, social engineering. That's a better word. Thank you. I knew there was a more common term. So that we've got these micromanagement, social engineering laws that are just coming out in droves in the form of add-ons to the farm bill and freaking other crap that happens. These budgets and that budget, like these little things. And there is, it is a known fact that, and was it Neil Gorsuch, the one of the Supreme Court justices, just recently last week came out and said, and in his opinion on some case, I think he wrote the dissenting opinion, his thing was like, the judicial system has gotten so bad to where, and it is so complex, and there are so many rules and so many laws that there really is not a single person in existence who isn't breaking at least a dozen laws, of which at least one of them is a prisonable offense.
Nice.
That literally there's nobody in the United States who shouldn't be in prison. That's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to throw out a ridiculous law. It was around Halloween time, and I think it's like Vermont or some state that says it's against the law to go trick-or-treating if you're over the age of 13. It was a big discussion, like, how many of us after 13 were trick-or-treating? Well, throw them in jail for, why?
That's one of the things I heard is that literally they said at one point there was a 5-year-old kid that was in prison and a 10-year-old kid. I listened to 2 stories about that because there's these private prisons that are making money off people. So they're taking everybody and anybody they can and literally kids being in prison.
Prison or juvie?
Well, probably
the juvenile detention centers are under private ownership, and what I was looking into was they were including that in the prison system.
Definitely.
I think the easy answer to what Austin's talking about is put sunset clauses on laws. That way, we have to revisit them revisit them every 5-10 years and see like, hey, do we still want this? Does this still make sense, or was this absolute
Has it
bullshit?
been working? Right. Yeah. Has the culture changed? Has the technology changed?
Has the judge changed?
Right.
Yeah. Otherwise, you just have this one way, ramp of laws being created and going on the books, and the book just getting thicker and thicker and thicker.
But that's how most people believe, is that there's a right and there's a wrong, there's a yes and there's a no, there's a this is how it should be. And I think it's very rare actually to find anybody that thinks you can change your mind, the society might change, the culture might change. Obviously that's something we all believe. I don't think that's as rampant as we would hope it would be.
And freedom is not in style. Yeah. I don't care what Sean Hannity says. Is the intro to his show, freedom is back in style. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
And I've listened to your show, and I'm definitely more conservative than I am liberal, but the conservative crowd is just as control freaks, freak oriented as the liberals. They just want to control different things. Don't tell me freedom is in style when you're the one who still decides what I get to be free with. Like that is not. I mean, I think I'm a very loud and proud libertarian these days, right? And sure, I get it. Libertarians, there's certain platforms and whatever, and anytime you put yourself in a box, there's always a caveat. But nonetheless, of the three major, if there are three major political streams, libertarian is by far, to me, the closest to where I would go. And the thing about that, I would say the reason that makes me is because I genuinely do disagree with many behaviors. I, however, do not think that my opinion over your behavior should matter.
Would you say that that's overall the libertarian viewpoint on this subject in particular? Do they have a viewpoint on the subject?
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Libertarians on prison. On the Facebook group that I follow is oh darn it, libertarian Facebook group. I can't think of the name of it right now, but they regularly post stuff on prison, especially now with all of the states that are legalizing marijuana, and realizing that the prisons are filled with people who are there because of marijuana.
Ooh, what do you do?
Non-violent drug offenders.
Do you pardon them?
Non-violent drug offender. Yeah. Why? Now that the rules have changed, why don't they just immediately get out?
Yeah.
And they're in states where it's now legal.
Wow.
That they have retroacted
California was trying to pass something like that. I don't know if they ended up doing it or not, but that would make that would even clear their record and everything.
That's what I found this press release with. Sorry, go ahead, David.
No, I was saying a lot of people that went to jail for drug possession, they had that record on their record, and all the issues with getting jobs and stuff like that still apply to them, even though what they did is now legal.
But even though it's legal in the state, it's still illegal federally, so they would still be breaking that law?
Sure, but the state is now making money off of it via taxes, and the drug dealer that was trying to make a living is behind bars. So, not to say that
no, and on top of that,
are created equal, but
a lot of these, like, if you have a record, this is the funny thing, if you went to jail for any drug related crime, you cannot sell legal pot anymore.
Is that federal?
No, it's not federal, but a lot of these states that have legalized recreational use and so on and so forth have that in, like, if you went to jail for a drug related crime, then you can't sell the legal stuff now.
There's an element to, hey, when it was illegal, you were breaking the law.
Sure.
It's now legal doesn't mean that you weren't breaking the law 2 years ago. So I get elements of that. I think the component is then you have to look at the desire for punishment. This punishment culture, this get them, they're different than me culture is really the freaking, we're just putting out more, literally every time something offensive happens on Twitter, there's a group of people that become the anti-offensive thing on Twitter, a coalition, and started lobbying Congress to make a law against that small group of people.
Well, here's a good question that brings up, because so many victims of crimes or even the people want justice. They want justice served. So, we've been talking about punishment, but what does it mean to enact justice? What is justice? Because it's our justice system. What is that creating?
I think that deserves air quotes.
Our justice system?
Yes.
I think there's a lot of there's a different way to value what law is broken. For example, if I get arrested for smoking pot and having a bong on me, that's completely different as if I were to go kill somebody. And so while there's different levels, it has to reflect that somehow, because taking a life is completely different than, I don't know, doing something stupid, like running a light and arguing with a police officer. I don't know.
I feel like there's a backstory there, but
No, there isn't. I just trying to think of some cool law that could be broken, and that was nothing could be found in my brain.
Give me flashbacks over here.
Some red lights, sir?
I've heard your red light story.
Yeah.
I think not to shift away, because this kind of plays party to what you're saying. I think one of the interesting things I came across as we were digging through this stuff is when I came across Michael Moore's documentary, something about U.S. invading the world. I forget what the title of it was, but he invaded Norway because of their prison system. And for comparison's sake, Norway has about a 20% recidivism rate. Like, people within 5 years, people will be back in jail at the 20%. Whereas in the U.S., I think somebody said earlier, 60-something percent.
Is what I heard. But
Michael Moore gives it 80%. So who knows where his numbers are? But either way, stark contrast. And if you were to look into the style of the prison systems, they're dramatically different. Like, I would venture to say that a maximum security Norwegian prison is comparable to a minimum security prison in the U.S., minimum white collar prison in the U.S. And the emphasis so much there is, I loved it, but they're like, we're getting these people ready to be somebody's neighbor again. And he was talking to a guy who was in for homicide. He was in the kitchen, bunch of knives behind him. Nobody was concerned. And then they had another prison that they highlighted. It was kind of like a place where people, like a reward place for people to go, or for convicts to go to after they've been good in the other prisons. And these guys could go for a swim if they wanted to. They just couldn't swim all the way across to the land on the other side. Otherwise, that was an escape. But I think it just highlights the big difference in why are we doing this? Is it because we're going for justice? Is it because we're doing retaliation? Is it because we want to create good neighbors for the future? And there's a vastly different, tree of progress to get you to each one of those.
That's a really hard subject. So we were even briefly talking about that the other day, because there used to be Pell Grants for prisoners that they could go to college and get a college education and come back and have skills. But, if some kid murders my son, I don't want him getting free college. Like, that's not fair when my son has to pay for it. So I totally get why they pulled that. But at the same time, do you want that person going back into society with no skills other than learning how to deal drugs? And so I believe it should be more of a reform system. Sure, serve your time, you're punished, you're removed from society because you messed up. But in the meantime, we need to train you how to be a good citizen. I think there are some people, there is a whole nother side to it, the mental side. There are some people who are just mentally unable to enter society again, and they should be locked up.
Should they be in prison or should they be in a mental ward?
And that's a good question. And I think a lot of people that are in prison should be in a mental ward, but a lot of the funding for mental institutions has gone. I know we have a real problem with that here in Michigan. There's one location that's a lockdown facility, and it's in high demand because there are people that should be there, but they can't get there because there's not funding for it.
In the state we're in, if you're a child and need wraparound care, you have to go to a different state entirely because there's no place for the mental health piece.
How long is a conviction for murder? Does anybody know?
It depends.
Very wildly, unfortunately.
First degree, or like the first degree is like premeditated or something like that, isn't it? I don't know. I to be honest, I am completely ignorant about that, but I'm curious how long of a period it would be that you would have to be in jail for. And I mean, if you think about it, like being away that long from society and what happens to you mentally, I mean, gracious.
I just Googled it real quick. So not less than 10 years nor more than 25 years for first degree murder.
I mean,
that's the premeditated one.
Even 10 years. I mean, I know
that's a long time.
Yeah, and you lose your. I imagine you lose your ability to handle social situations. I mean, you're hanging out with a bunch of guys for 10 years straight, and that's all you see, and you can't go wherever you want to go. And
assuming
then
you were a man when you murdered someone, I guess.
Hey, so here's a fun vision exercise. Imagine it's 1994 and you've killed somebody. You got the max sentence, 25 years. You get out this year. Oh my God! How much?
From 1994 till now, the whole world's changed. It's a whole different world when you get out. Let alone what you've gone through in those years.
And I imagine you don't get any sort of psychological help coming out.
No.
You know, you just.
And that's what they're aiming for. That's what they're aiming for. That's what this act that President Trump just enacted was, to try and better equip people as they're going out to become part of society again. So we're headed in that direction. I at least feel as a culture we're headed in that direction, because it can't stay the way it is. I mean, 25% of the world's population of prisoners is in the United States. Like, something is really messed up here.
I guess, as with running any business or thinking about any concept like this, if it's all a big machine, there's only so many levers that you can pull to change the dynamics of what this machine is doing. And in this case, like, we could talk about what happens when people get out and everything like that. I still come back to, why the fuck are there so many people in the prison?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And to me, it's an input problem.
Well, I can tell you why. That's what I looked into, was the privatization of the prisons. They said from the 80s, before the 80s, it was all federally and state run. Mm-hmm. Those prisons started to get overrun, so they started going into privatizing. Between the 80s and, I think they said, the early 2000s, the amount of prisoners increased 700%. They said this did not match. In fact, in that time, the amount of crime has actually decreased, and it didn't go along with the population increasing. It was purely prisoners, the amount of prisoners increasing. And it was because almost half of the 2.5 million people that are incarcerated are in privatized prisons, which means they are all about their shareholders. They're all about making money, and heads are money. So as the 10-year-olds, the 5-year-olds, getting them in the door, getting them in a bed is money. Mm-hmm. So they've been, I read a lot of articles about how they've been bribing judges. They spent $75 million on lobbyists trying to get laws passed, because as soon as you relax the laws on drugs, relax the laws on illegals, relax any laws, and you don't have as many criminals, they're not getting as many people in the door. They even have agreements with states that basically saying, like, if 90 to 100% of their beds aren't full, that the state has to pay them money to compensate them for it.
Mhm.
So the state is just shoving people in these privatized prisons. So that's why you have the laws. That's why you have the amount of people.
That doesn't create any weird incentivization right there.
Right.
All right. No conflict of interest. No, it's totally good. I mean, you obviously have that. And then I still come back to our culture of the, I keep thinking like, okay, so you go to China and you have this issue of how do I control my neighbor, right? You go to some other country that doesn't do prison, they just kill you. It's still, how do I control my neighbor? And then you come here to the States and it's, how do I control my neighbor? And I get, if your neighbor wants to kill your son, you probably want to control your neighbor. And I think there's the obvious things of murder and rape and assault and violence and stuff like that. But the victimless crimes, and this is the big libertarian thing, like if it's the victimless crime of, you know, I'm doing drugs, there's no, I am the victim of my own stupidity, right? That they would have a whole list, and I wish I probably should be better prepared with
Prostitution.
that one, you know, like it's two consenting adults, right, paying for a service. Who is the person? If the two people in it, go ahead.
The hard part on that is, how do you know it's consensual? Yes, it's consensual, but my pimp is threatening to kill me if I say otherwise. Or if I'm a meth addict, that's great, but then I have a child in the corner who's taken a kilo of meth to school to say, my mom and dad need help, so help me. Like, that's a true, yeah, like,
I mean,
those are the gray areas, right?
On the prostitution side of that thing, I mean, it's a world of difference if it's a legalized situation.
Yeah.
You could have
Right, this is
More
like
regulated.
clinical places to go to.
I was going to say, that gets
the
the
war
whole
on
idea of
fill in the
law.
blank.
Can't.
all they have to do is turn it into a war on drugs or a war on prostitution or a war on this, and suddenly what you have is, have you seen like the war on drugs? Like before the war on drugs started, it was about 7% of the U.S. population that used drugs, right?
Mm.
And the overdosing was way Lower. The violent crimes surrounding the drugs didn't exist. The money in it was moderate, and it was a normal industry. Like Joni's grandma was telling stories about how when she was in nursing school, she took cocaine to
She used to go to the nurses' station to get cocaine to stay up all night to study.
Well, cocaine was also in cough syrup, right?
Yes.
right, and Coca-Cola.
And Coca-Cola. It was normal.
But the
And
moment
she
you
didn't
make
become a cocaine addict. Imagine that.
right, because you put a law on it, and then suddenly you develop a black market around it. You develop criminality around it, which of course attracts criminals, which of course attracts violence, which of course attracts more money, because now instead of buying it at the grocery store, I have to buy it, you know, in this seedy alley back here where I got to pay 5 times as much. And so there's 5 times the amount of money. And now you have this attraction for all this other stuff. And then you've got the prison system, and then you've got more laws around that. And then you've got to hire more police. And it's literally these wars that we create are by and large a financial racket that are a control mechanism to then create where what you now have, and there is a movie that recently came out with Tom Cruise, that the CIA is literally was literally the number one cocaine dealer in the United States. I don't know if they still are, and it's not the point. The point is that literally Hollywood's made a movie on it, and it is based on a true story.
Follow the money is a saying for a reason.
Right. And so when the state becomes the ones that are the place where those 7% of that population needs to go, which, by the way, the numbers haven't changed. The bad numbers, anyways, or the normal numbers haven't changed. It's still 7% of the population who uses drugs. But the violence and the overdosing and all the crap that comes with it, because you have a criminal culture around it, that's still there. So 40 years later, the war on drugs hasn't worked. You know what we should do? We should now do a war on guns. And then we should do a war on religion. And then we should do it because suddenly you criminalize freedom, and what you build around it is a culture of control and manipulation and greed and all that other stuff that then the prison system thrives on. If you don't have that culture, you have a fraction of the prisoners, and ergo, you don't have a prison system that's nearly the size it is. And our
is
dog
that?
just fell off the chair, I think.
Oh my! What is that verse in the Bible? The law came so that sin would increase.
And
Yeah.
it does. What you
Correlates
focus on is what you get.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what's happened. The more laws you make, I'll be honest, personal example from this morning. So I was driving into work. I drive, maybe 5 over. I'm a pretty decent driver, but I had a cop behind me half the way into town. You can tell I was watching every single mile per hour because now the law literally was behind me, watching me. I literally pulled into a gas station and let him pass so I could just drive like normal the rest of the way into town. But where the law is that's your focus. So my entire focus was, am I breaking the law? Am I breaking the law? Am I breaking the law? And that's how this works. The more laws you have, the more people are focused on it and the more prisoners you end up with.
I think one of my favorite parts of the war on drugs is that you take these drug offenders and you put them in prison, and then where is the drug problem? In prison.
In prison.
Yeah.
Like,
Well, it's kind of crazy. Like I was, for some reason, I went the race thing, but the arrest, the imprisonment of Black people has increased like crazy, and the violent crime, like it's kind of messed up because violent crime in the Black communities has actually decreased, but the arrests have maintained the same amount because they are getting arrested for drug possession, for possession of drug paraphernalia and all that stuff. And it's just kind of this whole, I'm basically just really reiterating what we were just talking about in regards to the whole war on drugs. It doesn't work. And, you're, I kind of had a funny idea or thought here when you guys were talking. I was like, basically it's college for criminals. It's
criminal
go
college.
to criminal college, learn how to become a criminal in college.
That's exactly what it is. You're right. Do you think, you brought up the African Americans and Black people in prison, do you think that's a profiling thing, or I didn't look into that very much. I didn't look at
totally think it's a profiling thing. And it's not, I'm not saying it's obviously not a good thing to profile.
Right.
I'm going to put that out there. I don't think it's a good thing. But the fact remains that it happens. And the fact also remains that when it does happen, they're going to get convicted because of these dumb laws.
Mm-hmm.
Because, let's face it. Everybody does pot. Everybody does pot. Or, a lot of people do.
We don't.
We don't, but...
Just to put that out there.
which state are we in? No, we definitely don't do that.
It's not, I don't think it's as taboo as it was when I was growing up, for sure. And it's not, go ahead, sorry.
Even if it's not profiling now, what you have is a result of, there was profiling. So there's crime. Police officers are attracted to crime. So now you've got more police officers in an area. Naturally, they're going to find more crime. And it's a cycle that's hard to break there.
It's kind of like,
Does anyone... Sorry, go ahead, Jen.
I was just talking about class, like how there's this, we've segregated our communities and then poverty's kept them in those communities. And so there's no crossover. There's hardly, opportunities for them to go to school, to better their lives, to increase their annual income so they can get out of this rut. And it's almost like we have out of prisons within the communities in which we've kind of segregated people.
Sure. And you bring up, economic stratification, and just the idea of like people that have money and are able to, hey dog.
This is Hops, by the way. He's the unofficial mascot.
There you go.
Oh boy.
Economic something fancy.
Oh, just the idea people with money can all of a sudden avoid prison because they've got money.
Whereas they can only do a 6-month term because they're a good athlete.
Sure.
Oh boy.
Oh no.
Or they're an actor for a show and nobody knows why they got off. Or
Right.
You also have to look at, you have young men that are, you have young men, whatever, that are going to prison, and that is a person, that is a part of the family that will not be able to contribute to the family.
Mhm.
So you're destabilizing families in these areas that are the places that require the, I mean, if you're living in a rough neighborhood, say your dad smokes pot or whatever, was smoking pot with his friends, cop comes, dad goes to jail for however long he goes to jail for pot. Dad's not making money for my family. Guess who has to do that? Mom.
Guess who's home alone now? Yep.
Mhm.
That is the unfortunate side effect that you have to, I mean, in some ways, now people coming out of prison are starting to get the vocational training and the education again, but you have to go to prison to get that. And there's a reason they were in prison in the first place. So there's a whole nother side to it of what do we do to keep people out of prison. That's not something I really looked into. I don't know if anyone else did. That's a huge thing. I do know, I kept hearing about some bill that was passed when Clinton was president that I don't know if anyone else knows about that or heard into that.
Strikes, or
I think that's
Was it 3 strikes? It was. I know it was something to do with if you had even it decreased the amount of drug possession that could get you into prison.
Oh yeah.
You could have a very small amount and still go to prison. I know that was part of it, and that was something that was just recently repealed to try and get. So these guys that have, a couple smokes in their pocket are going to prison and then coming out worse. Is trying to, let's do something different with those guys. Let's reform them. Let's get them some drug addiction training. Let's get them, and not send them into the prison system.
That's Portugal. I don't remember. I watched the video quick before while I was setting stuff up, but apparently Portugal does not have any drug laws at all. Like, you can do whatever you want. If I think they actually provide help for people that are if you, man, I wish I would have paid attention to that video a little bit better. But if you need help, if you're a heroin addict or whatever, and you need help, like, the government will help you. They provide places where you can actually take heroin or opioids.
Oh, I've heard of that.
And they give you like clean syringes and stuff like that, and I know I think Switzerland also has something very similar. Like, these places where you can go if you're addicted. You can go there. You can take a shower. You can shoot up if you have to, with clean equipment and everything, because there's a lot of side effects or additional things that that you can get from shooting up with dirty stuff. But on top of that, like, those are places where if they need help, if they need psychological help, or if they're trying to stop, then you have a place that will give these people the help that they need to be able to stop. And apparently that's just had like an amazing something like a 20% decrease in opioid use in these places. I think that one was in particular Switzerland. I again did not watch the Portugal one in as much depth as I would have liked, but to me that just makes sense. If this is, like, especially with hard stuff like heroin and meth and all that stuff, if we have a place where these people can do it without feeling like it's something that is, super illegal or whatever, and if they need help, that they have it available to them, I think that shifts the concept from being like, oh, we need to punish you because you're sick, and move it to, oh, you're sick, we can help you. Let's help these people.
Well, it sounds like it removes some of the stigma that they're not like a valid human, I guess, sort of.
Yeah.
Or criminal.
It makes sense, but I can understand the pushback too, because you talk about you reference it as a sickness, and then somebody might say, "Well, I have type 1 diabetes," and you're given this junkie who's got a self-inflicted disease, Narcan or whatever it is that I forget, that or needles and all the things they need to do that. How about give me needles at least or whatever, so I have everything that I need for this
Right.
I can understand
Non-choice.
I can understand the pushback,
Mhm.
but
I think it just goes into a bigger escalate of how messed up everything is, how everything is tied to money. And when you follow the money, you can see why things are messed up.
well, fortunately,
I
the
think
system makes perfect sense. So
Totally. We have a podcast
yeah,
about
right.
it, so
maybe we should talk about that next week. I'm totally prepared for that one.
because we are talking about money next time, huh?
Correct.
Yes, we are. Hidden
The
Secrets of
viewers
Money
didn't
with
know.
Mike Maloney. To me, it's money, and again, control.
Mhm.
Because there is a cultural phenomenon that the more and more you see it, you realize, oh my gosh, like everyone wants to control other people to create this like safe space for themselves, and pick a topic, pick a side of the aisle, and you will find a control freak. Right. And that is, and even, the dirty laundry of the Libertarian Party is, I'm totally libertarian, well, except for that one issue where I would like to control you. And, that's where you then get the libertarian purists who are like, get out of here. You're not a libertarian, you're just selectively controlling. Like but it's still this, everyone's got their pet issue and some people have like 20 of them. But, it is that pick your pet issue. Pick that thing that happened to you when you were a kid. I'm getting a little spiritual and preachy for a second. Like, pick that thing that really, really affected your life in a negative way, that you have a deep passion for, and that you realize, no, this is a really bad behavior because it really, really hurt me, or it really, really hurt my family, or it really, really hurt my brother or my friend or whatever. And so you got to experience it in the shittiest way possible as the victim or the friend of a victim, and it is very, very, very real for you. Now, realize that your opinions of that are often so incredibly strong that is most likely the thing that you're totally cool with, all sorts of freedom for all these other things except for that one thing, right? Because what happened to you was terrible, and what happened around you was horrendous and legitimate. But now multiply that by a worldwide population of people where everyone has something shitty happen to them when they were a kid. Everyone has that story, and you realize that, oh my gosh, if this is about trying to control each other to create this space, this is a losing strategy. This is not a way to build a society. Yes, crap happens. Yes, it's valid. Yes, it's legit. But if you want to start controlling other people with your pet pain, please back up and realize that is not going to change the world. That is not going to fix your problem. And it sure as heck isn't going to create a better society where you actually are safe. Right? So control and punishment cannot be the answer. And there's got to be, and obviously, I'll speak for New Age Christianity. Go check out newagechristianity.org. I believe there's plenty of other answers. I think Culture of Honor by Danny Silk, and there's plenty of non-spirit answers. There's plenty of great thinkers in the political space and in the education space. But control is really an easy answer when something hurts you. But if you back up and realize that there's 7.7 billion people on this planet who've been hurt, and if we're all trying to control each other to avoid that hurt, that's not going to work.
We're just going to create more hurt.
Yeah. And then we're going to get what we've got. I'm done preaching.
Well, maybe we should take it around the circle here and get our last final thoughts. And we've been going for about an hour now. So, circle.
Prisons.
Steep.
Yeah. No. There's a benefit sometimes of going first and sometimes not so much. But I would say going back to kind of just that God piece and that the value piece, if we all had the same standards of morals and kind of trusting that my neighbor is going to do the right thing and they're going to live a loving, living, prosperous life, then everything will be fine. But until we can get on that same page, it's an uphill battle.
I guess for my part, to jump off of what Jen just said, like, you do have to start somewhere. Right? You're not going to flip the switch overnight and have an entire society where there's honor. Right? You're not going to get suddenly all the Democrats and Republicans waking up and going, you know what? You do make a valid point there. Right? Even if there is a valid point, they'll never acknowledge it. So where do you start? And I'm not sure I necessarily have the answer that's the most well thought out, but I do believe the best place to start is to start looking at the laws that are literally, they're dead. You know, that whole, what do you say, the sunset laws, or the idea that laws that are freaking, why are people in prison for something that's now legal? Why are people, in prison for something that costs more and requires and creates a worse scenario? I mean, I just think there's some common sense solutions. Oh, what a Washington, D.C. phrase. Common sense solutions. But start somewhere. Don't try to tackle it all at once. But at the same time with the prison thing, like, don't take your freaking time. There's people's real lives at stake.
Yeah.
So don't sit on your laurels and just, but we'll figure it out eventually. Like, no, get to work, but start somewhere.
Yeah, I think, in my intro, I said, the system is so fucked up beyond all recognition. People come out so messed up, but people are realizing that. And, our president can only do as much as he can. I'm not a diehard Trump fan, but I believe that this was a big step in moving towards prison reform. It is going to take time. There is the law of growth, and I believe our world is headed in a direction of self-government and self-realization. And it's going to take time. Unfortunately, it's just going to take a lot of time. But having these conversations, having this conversation, getting the word out and talking about things, I think is part of the process. So I'm excited to be part of the process. I'm excited for people to hear this message and to start thinking about things, start talking about things, and it's all part of it.
Yeah, totally. I think part of the problem is that a lot of people just aren't aware of how big of an issue this kind of thing is. I mean, this is one issue. Like, we talk about a lot of issues. This is one that a lot of people aren't aware of in detail at all. And to me, it goes back to people are valuable regardless of if they've messed up. And so often we just write them off. Once someone has messed up, they get written off. And I think that's one of the things that we need to definitely change, is just valuing people again, regardless of what kind of situation they came from. And one of the things that you were saying, Austin, about why are people, that we've talked about in general, why are people still in there for stuff that that's now legal? And something that we didn't bring up, I think, at least not that I recall, is the people that are in there that are wrongly convicted. And how out of 100 people, just for example, out of 100 people sentenced to death, 4 are likely innocent. I mean, that sucks. And that's not even yeah, that's not even like taking into account all the other people that are convicted that are innocent. I had too many notes, so I'm not finding where my statistic was of how many of the estimated number of people that are wrongly convicted, but I think it was around. No, I'm not gonna butcher that. I don't know. But then, as far as like people actually getting exonerated, that is increasing, or it's doing better than it was, partly due to the DNA evidence and stuff. But right now, it's, from what I could gather, about 3 people per week are being exonerated, which isn't a ton, but it is something. And those people, it's great that they're not in prison anymore, but they have a lot of times no, they don't get any help too. They were still in the system. They still have the same kind of problems, but they're just like kicked out. They don't get any like help with job placement or any of that kind of stuff. And a lot of them don't get compensated at all for the time that they were actually, the lives were taken away from them. And that doesn't make any sense either. So there's just a lot of sides to this that a lot of people don't pay attention to, and I think it's just valuable to be aware of and to care about.
The war on drugs, which has caused, at least if anything, been a catalyst for this whole prison issue, is obviously a failure. We just, I mean, we honestly just need to find a better solution to this. I mean, if you look at it from top to bottom, there literally is not a single part of this whole situation that is beneficial to anybody. We aren't we aren't helping these people. We are putting them in a horrible situation, and a lot of the reasons that we're putting them in there are don't even make sense anyways. And I think it's something that we need to do something about. I mean, this is not a good situation for those people that they get imprisoned. Not a good situation for their families. It's putting an unnecessary burden on them, and a lot of these people come from communities that aren't super great in the first place, and the burden of having one less parent, one less child, or whatever is sometimes just too great, So yeah, whatever, we need to do something about it. We need to at least raise awareness about it. So yeah.
I think one of the big things that was brought up that really kind of struck a chord with me is just something that's been sitting inside me for a while, and I've known it but just didn't put words to it. Is just the idea of control. People trying to control other people. And, what can we do about that besides opening up our mind and going to the epoch.org? We can begin to honor the differences between us. So, just thinking in my life recently, like working with somebody who has an entirely different temperament than I do. But it was so necessary because, me as a natural go with the flow guy, if we were all go with the flow guys, we might end up in a world of hurt at some point when we needed that detailed person who really sticks to the rules. That said, not seeing somebody who's different than us and then trying to figure out how we can control them and get them to be more like us. So when you see some differences, don't fear them, but try to honor them and see what kind of beauty they bring to the world. Yes, we all want to live in safe places. Well, at least most of us do.
I like living on the edge.
I knew there were people like you, so I want to honor the difference.
Danger, Fletcher.
That's right.
Yeah. We all want to live in a safe place, but at the same time, I think it's worth bringing forward that those countries I mentioned before, like the Norwegian prison system, there was an attorney's office who kind of took some of the money they had made from prosecuting, I think it was the California state penitentiary system. They had taken some of that money they won from those court cases and then flew some prison administrators from North Dakota over to Norway to go check that system out. And those administrators came back in tears and said, "We're hurting people." So coming back to the why are we doing this? I mean, I think it has to be, I think that those Scandinavians might have the right idea of helping people be better neighbors. Maybe that's
supposed to be what, the Department of Justice and the Department of Corrections.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be the why, right?
Right. So that said, I mean, sometimes I try to police myself and think, am I being too naive here? But if it's working somewhere else, if it's merely a culture change away, then maybe it's a culture change worth pursuing, because these are real people with real lives that are being impacted forever by a bad system. So that said, thanks for joining us this week. I think it was a pretty good one.
Kind of a sobering one.
Yeah.
Right.
You can find more stuff, more opinions on this on theepoch.org in the podcast section. You can find us on the social medias with at Epoch Ideas. You can find us on YouTube, like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. And it helps us a ton. If you can't, at this point in your life, become a patron and just, or, when you're on our site and you find the MP3s that are for sale for free, and you don't have to donate, you're not able to donate yet, a way to help us out is by sharing our content with other people, getting it in front of other people's eyes. And that does us a huge solid. Did I miss anything, crew?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Golden.
All right. Cool. So what's our phrase? We got a new one. Anybody remember it?
Oh, conversations worth having? Is that what you mean?
Something like that, yeah.
I thought it was we sort of try.
We sort of try to have conversations worth having. And,
there you go.
Thanks for joining us this week. And remember, this isn't the whole thing. We're not experts, and we didn't go so deep into this that the whole topic's been exhausted. This is just a primer for you. So dig in, have the conversation. Take care.